Hey, welcome. I'm glad to see everybody here. This is obviously not going to be seeing everybody here because I'm pre-recording this workshop. The reason I'm pre-recording it is I've run through it a couple of times. Practice makes perfect. But I'm also wanting to get a nice clean recording so it guards against any problems in the workshop where the recording may not come out, which has happened before. So let's get a nice clean recording, and I'll post this and make it available to people after the workshop. So let's get going. The name of our presentation today is the art in photography. And what do we mean by when I say art in photography? Well, not all photos are art, and nor are all photos intended to be art. Good examples of that. Like good examples would be journalistic and commercial pictures. But even if they're not intended to be art, we can probably all agree that there are some better journalistic photographers and better commercial photographers than others. So while their purpose may not have been art or fine art when they set out, they're more artful in what they do. Their pictures have more impact. They're better photographers. And it's not all about the equipment, understanding the equipment. This is about the other side of that, which is the art side of it. So our goal here is to give you some ideas how to be more intentional. That'll be an important word here, intentional and artful in what you do, and to create more impact with your images. So understanding the art in photography is what we're all about. We're not suggesting here that your pictures are going to all be great works of art, and nor do we really want them that way. We want your pictures to just be more artful. So let's get on with it. We obviously don't have people in this room because I'm pre-recording this, but in the workshop, we certainly welcome all questions. There's no such thing as a stupid question. Maybe in this case there is here, but that's it. Just please ask questions. The more interaction we have, the better. What are we going to cover today? Okay, here's the agenda. It's not real complicated, and we hope to leave enough time at the end to do a little photo critiquing. So what is the agenda? Of course, I attempted to streamline this thing because it would take weeks to cover this topic if I did it any justice. But we're just whetting your appetite, so we mentioned that before. The agenda is simple. We'll define the characteristics of art, what makes art, and we'll talk about what makes art in photography. We'll define those characteristics for you. Then we're going to get into how to become a more intentional photographer. Intention being one of the characteristics of art. How to plan your shot. Talk about storytelling, which we all are. Image is worth 1,000 words, as they say. So yes, we are storytellers. We'll talk about storytelling tips, emphasizing the subject of the image. No story, no subject, no story. And talk a little bit about composition. We won't get deep into compositional rules. We'll cover a couple of my favorites, and then we will get into practicing what we've learned on real images. I hope we get there because that's where I think the real learning happens. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what is art. Okay, there are several key elements in art. Okay, what we call art. Is defined by these key elements. Creativity and imagination, intention and expression, aesthetic value, emotional impact, and skill and craftsmanship. How do we mean when we talk about that when we're applying it to photography? Creativity and imagination. Art is not about copying or imitating, and it's not standing in the same place and taking the same picture as everybody else. It's about inventing and innovating. In photography, that can take a lot of different shapes, different subjects that people don't typically take pictures of is one. Different perspectives, different types of photography, such as infrared photography, which is one of my favorites, using things like slow shutter speed, intentional camera movement, shallow depth of field, light painting. There's a lot of different things that you can do in photography to be creative. And just plain old taking good creative perspectives. I think I may have mentioned that already, is a good one too. Intention and expression. What is intention and expression? Well, artistic photos are intentional. They're not accidental. They don't result from somebody spraying and praying, as we say, just pointing the camera and hoping to get something good. They result from intention and planning, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. So you set out, you as the artist, you set out to create art, okay? And frequently this is where the idea of fine art photography is separated from the rest of us people who don't do fine art photography. Fine art photographers set out with a really clear idea in mind of what they're going to do. They may even set it up if it's a still life. And they have a very, very clear concept of what they're going to be doing, and then they execute it. They work this, they work the scene, they work the light, they do everything to it. The rest of us people, I think, are intentional without even realizing it. None of us sent out to produce junk. We all want our pictures to be something special. So whether it's a hike that we're on or we're downtown Houston taking pictures, it doesn't matter. Our intention is to come back with something meaningful, something that expresses a story, something that's pretty neat that other people will look at and react to. So we are intentional. The idea here is to become more intentional. Emotional impact, aesthetic value. Before I go there, aesthetic value. What is aesthetic value? Aesthetic value is, you'll know it when you see it. It's both this and the next one, emotional impact. If you're leafing through a bunch of images, you won't stop until something hits you. In aesthetic value, good photos appeal. They catch your attention. Okay, they draw you in and they reveal the subject and the story through some compositional techniques, which we'll talk about, artistic techniques. Good photos will hold your attention and they won't make you wonder what the heck they're about. Okay, so a lot of pictures you look at and you go, huh, what is this? You pass on to the next one. Emotional impact is really what grabs you. Good photos make you feel something. The core of all art, not only photography, is feeling. If you don't feel anything, there's nothing emotionally that touches you, you won't linger over the photo. And that's just the way it is. Now in photography, photo is light, graphy is writing. Writing with light. Light is very important to photography in creating the mood of the image. So whether it's soft light, hard light, whatever. So emotional impact is strongly influenced by light. And also something we'll get into quickly is in street photography, it's called gesture, peak moment of truth, whatever you want to call it. It's that peak moment that the photo is all about, that tells the story, if you will. We'll talk about a little bit more about what that is. It's not as simple as it may seem. For example, scoring a goal in football, that's certainly a peak moment, but it's more than that, and we'll talk what that is. And then skill and craftsmanship. If a good painter doesn't know how to paint, it's unlikely he's going to be a good artist. If a good photographer or a photographer doesn't know how to take pictures with his camera, use his equipment, unlikely he'll be a good photographer or a good storyteller. So yes, get to know your equipment, use it, and until it's second nature. Skill and craftsmanship is important. We're not teaching that in this class, but it is important. So, for both the creator and the observer, art is a subjective experience. It's what you feel, and feelings are subjective, right? The essence of all art lies in that ability to provoke thought and emotion in people. Okay, it transcends the physical form. This is what I'll get into. Ansel Adams says next, art transcends that physical form and resonates at a deeper level than what you're seeing. So if I'm seeing a picture of a cowboy and a horse, or I'm seeing a beautiful mountain scene or something, it's more than that. It's more than that. That's what makes art out of it. So Ansel Adams said it best, okay? It says art implies control over reality. Control over reality, okay? For reality itself poses no sense of aesthetics. Remember, aesthetics is part of art. Photography becomes art when certain controls are applied. And guess what? They're applied by the photographer, right? So the photographer controls reality by what they do. So the artistic photograph goes beyond the literal representation of the scene or the subject, with the artist in control, implies purpose and intention. Control is all about purpose and intention. Okay. So this is all interesting stuff. Let's get into what intention is. What can you do to become a more intentional artist? Okay. Art is intentional. That's what I said before. It's something created by the artist according to a vision or plan. All right. So first of all, you've got to envision the final image. You got to envision what you're trying to do. Like I said, with fine art photography, they have that whole vision. They know exactly what they want to get out of the end. Most of us don't. We're working the scene. We're looking at it. But in our heads, we ought to be thinking about what is this going to look like? What is the subject? First of all, what's the subject? What am I taking a picture of? A common mistake. I'll get in a little bit more of that in a second. Common mistake. What is it that I'm taking a picture of? And consider ways to highlight that subject in my picture. Compose it. Put it in the place where people can identify what it is. Think about the feeling in your story. Yes, feelings. Those are funny things to feel about, right? So think about the story and the message. What are you trying to get across? What is the feeling you're trying to get across? How does the scene make you feel, right? And that's maybe a soft subject. Think about the symbols or the symbology in the scene itself. We'll cover that in a bit. Is there something either explicitly symbolic, or do you feel some symbolism in the image when you look at it? Okay, what does it symbolize for you? That's the feeling. Okay, recognize. Obviously lighting is important. We talked about that. So recognize where the light's coming from. Is it soft light, hard light, backlight? Is it affecting the mood? And how does it? Can you do anything to control it? Can you use some sort of deflectors or some sort of your own light source? Or what is it you can do about the light, if anything? Maybe you wait till later in the evening or early in the morning or a different time. You come back at a different time. So light does draw our attention, and it creates a lot of mood in the picture. And it is all about the light, as they say in photography. It's all about the light. So recognize the light, and then understand what you can do in post-processing. If you're good at post-processing, and you can understand what you can do, you'll see a lot more in the scene than others do. You'll see the possibilities that others don't see. Okay, you'll see the story that can unfold once you get it home, and you can finish off the story in post-processing. Don't be afraid of post-processing. It really does make a difference. Okay, so in envisioning the scene, before you even click that shutter, identify the subject, think about the story and the feeling, the symbolism. Recognize the light qualities. Think about the light. Where is it coming from? Where should you be? How can you affect the light? And understand what you can do in post-processing. Okay. And then next, after you've done that, compose the shot. So, now you got the camera. You're starting to actually, before you press the shutter, now you're composing the shot. You're looking for that decisive moment. A decisive moment is a concept we'll talk about in a little bit. So you're looking for the decisive moment to click the shutter. Change perspectives, get high, get low, get wherever you can get. That'll make that decisive moment appear for you. Minimize distractions, eliminate clutter. Make sure the subject stands out. The subject's not hidden by background clutter. Make sure that there are things in the picture that if they shouldn't be there, then get rid of them. Get rid of them. One of the sayings that I like most is that photography is subtractive, painting is additive. So the artist and a painter will tend to add brushstrokes until they get what they want. A photographer will look at a scene and filter out background issues and take things out of the scene until the chaos comes to order. So they order the chaos by removing stuff and making the scene tell the story they want. And so that's an important thing. The distractions, minimize clutter, and then think about composition and seek balance. So remain as you go through this thing, remain conscious of compositional rules, which we'll talk about some of them. Become familiar with them and use them. You don't have to use them slavishly, but yes, use them. All right, think about them. Break some rules if you have to, but when you break a rule, think about it. This is the rule that I'm not breaking this, but I like it. I break the rule because I like the way this looks. It's more balanced. It's all about balance. And then finally, when you've got that, then optimize your camera. Think about your camera. Take the shot. Camera settings can help isolate your subject better by focusing, focal distance, focal depth of the field, lighting, things like that. So use your camera to bring out that story. So that's intentionality, envisioning, composing, and then using your camera properly and doing it consciously, not subconsciously. Intention. This one here, it talks about decisive moment. We've talked about the intention and looking for the decisive moment for when do I click that shutter. Frequently that moment's equated with something like peak action, a goal being scored. That might be part of it. In street photographer, I've heard the term gesture used, which is the expression, the hand movement, the body position that expresses the story best that I'm trying to get at. So maybe in sunset, at landscapes, it might be a sunset. That's the peak moment. And then, yes, all those things are part of it, okay? But the subtlety about the idea of peak moment is that as you move around and as the subject moves around and the scene moves around, the light changes, everything out there is in chaos. If you think all the items in front of you, everything's moving, it's a chaotic scene, all right? And as you move around, you get into position and everything comes into order. So that's the order, the control that you're applying that Ansel Adams talked about is you moving around looking for the peak moment when everything aligns, your composition's right, and order emerges from that chaos. And at that time, that's the peak moment. You click the shutter, okay? It may not happen once. It may happen many times as you move around the subject and take shots, but you're looking for that exact moment when it's perfect. It's perfect. So yes, it is about the subject moving perfectly and all that, but it's also about you moving and creating that compositional balance that makes sense. So, everything devolves back into chaos after it's done with, but you're looking for that order, that moment of order. Storytelling, okay? How do we tell stories? Yes, we're all storytellers. We are storytellers. That's what we do as photographers. So there's a lot of things that they do. I'd use this picture here as an example of storytelling, okay? I took this picture in Myanmar in a marketplace. Composition, we'll talk about this ad nauseum, guides the viewer's eye throughout the picture. Composition is important. You don't have to follow it slavishly, but you've got to be aware of what the compositional rules or guidelines are. And if you want to break them, break them. If you want to use them, but do it consciously. Next is your choice of subject. Or what kind of subject are you? Make sure that you got a subject in the picture. Okay, I'll show you in a second a picture I took that has no subject in it. Obviously, the subject in this particular picture is the woman and a woman's face and her expression, i.e., the moment, the peak moment, which I thought this was. Okay, so your choice of subject is important, and she tells a story. That's an up-close subject. You can contextualize the subject if it improves your story, or it tells a different story. If I had shown the same woman in a marketplace, it could have still been very picturesque, and if I'd shown it in color, it could also be picturesque, or tell a different story. It could be artistic, but it's not the story I chose to tell. Okay, but you can contextualize the picture. I think of it all the time. I take a lot of pictures of lighthouses, for example. I love lighthouses, and I rarely take a close-up of a lighthouse. I almost always contextualize it with the ocean behind it, sunset if I can get it, the cliff it's sitting on, etc., because that tells more dramatic a story of that lighthouse than it would be a close-up. So contextualizing your subject sometimes is important. Okay, so don't always fill the frame, but do what you can. Okay, emotion is the next part. Emotion, we've talked about it. Art is about emotion, and sometimes it's the symbology in the picture, but it's the emotion. This picture here has, to me, a lot of emotion. There's a lot of possible pain in the woman's face. She's gone through a lot. Her life is not like yours and mine, and she's taken that deep drag. Looks like deep thoughts in her mind, and that's probably the symbolism of somebody with their eyes closed doing what she's doing. Okay, so yes, emotion's important. You can get close up detail. Sometimes the story is told best close up. This is relatively close up, but you could even get closer. I could tell the story by taking a picture of her hands, for example, or just the hands on the cigar. Depending on what you want, a good close up can sometimes bring out that emotion too. So detail in the picture is important. The timing of the shot, we talked decisive moment. This was a decisive moment for me. She had a cigar in her hand and she was smoking on and off, but I was looking for that moment. This was it, when she closed her eyes and she took a nice deep drag. Lighting, we mentioned it before, lighting is always important, and storytelling. The color palette, I chose black and white here because it really shows the grit and the detail. Color could have worked also. Her hat and the clothes she was wearing had a lot of color, a lot of red, if I remember, and things like that in it. So, that could have been a different story, and depending on what you want to do and how you want to tell the story. As we talk about composition, we'll talk about color. Symbols and metaphors. We'll talk a little bit more about symbols and metaphors coming up. I love the topic of metaphors and symbols, because I think whether we realize it or not, there's a lot of symbology in our pictures, and there's a lot of what we do with our pictures has symbolism in it. Uh, and it is important, I think, to be aware of what that is. Okay. So, what are symbols and metaphors? Well, in art historically, there's been a lot of symbols over time. That can be some can be very broad. Things like storm clouds in the horizon symbolizing danger. That's a common symbolism. So your picture of a landscape has some big, heavy, deep clouds in the background. It looks like an impending storm, impending something, and it gives that feeling, symbolism, that feeling of danger and impending danger. A crow can symbolize death, a broken mirror symbolizing separation, security, etc. These are things that have been used in painting and art over the years. Okay, and I'll show you some of my pictures now that are different, and there's symbolism there. I can go through these pictures and I can pull out the symbolism. In some cases, I felt it. When I took the picture, I could sort of feel that symbolism. Later on, when I looked at the picture, I said, this is what I think this symbolizes for me. This is the way it feels. Feeling and symbolism being very, very almost synonymous in these cases. Okay. Old Tree took this one in the hill country. I guess we were out hunting bluebonnets. I can't remember. This is old Baylor, I think. This old tree's still there. Last time I was there, I took this a couple of years ago. It's an infrared shot. But what it symbolizes to me, it's a gnarly old tree. It's bent over. It's gone through a lot. Life has been hard on this tree. It's twisted and turned, but it's still standing and beautiful. So it's strength in the face of adversity is a symbolism in this tree here. Now, the important thing with symbolism is what I see as a symbol, you may not see. You may see something different. The point is it gives me that feeling, strength in the face of adversity. And giving me that feeling is also influenced the way I processed it and the way I took the picture. There are different angles of this tree that don't show the same thing. This angle shows twisting and pulling and turning in a great degree. Another one here is I play golf. This is the Deerwood Country Club on the second hole, I think, going away from the tee box, looking back at the tee box, early morning, sun coming up, burning off the mist. Sunrise is always sort of symbolized to me a new birth, hope, renewal, if you will. And that's what this is here, is the sun peeks through and makes at the beginning of the day, it shows renewal and hope shining, especially the sun rays coming through the trees the way they are. Beautiful morning. Light at the end of the tunnel, right? This was taken in Stockholm, Sweden, a little alleyway, like the way the cobblestones were catching the light, and the light at the end of the tunnel, at the end of the alleyway. So light at the end of the alleyway, light at the end of the tunnel. It hopefulizes something better, something future, something good in the future. So you walk toward the light. You feel hope for the future. Here's another one. I take a lot of old dead branches in the desert. This one, particular one, I actually thought of this when I took the picture. The old lone dead tree, a desolate landscape, beautiful sky behind it. To me, symbolized the passing from this earth, dying, if you will, reaching up toward heaven in hope, looking toward God or heaven, as it will. So these branches are reaching up toward heaven as the tree lies there in the desert. Past its prime. Sort of a sad look, but not really. It's a hopeful look too. So that sort of can be the symbology. And these symbols, again, may or may not be obvious to you or may not be the same symbols. But as you take pictures, when you want to get that feeling and you want to feel what the picture is and how you want to take the picture, think a little bit about symbolism and what this might mean. Yes, go a little bit off your rocker, stretch your mind, get creative. That is art. So, storytelling. We talked about storytelling and subject being one of them. Without a subject, you have no story, right? And I'll show you in the next slide, how I make this mistake probably more than anybody else. But I do recognize it in other people's pictures more than I probably should. I'll sit there and share and learn and see pictures and wonder to myself, what the heck was the guy thinking? But then I've got plenty of those myself. Okay, so subject. How do you find the subject in a picture? Fill the frame. Remember the woman, the face of the woman. Fill the frame. There's no mistaking what the subject is, and I think this is a common mistake in beginners. They have a subject, they want to take a picture of their family or their child or their kid or their pet, and the pet sits out there in the field, a quarter mile off, and they take the picture. Yeah, that's a picture of the pet, but you can hardly tell. So you fill the frame if you can. Now, of course, if it's better, like we talked about before, contextualize the subject, move further away, and put it in context. If you're going to do that, do think of the compositional rules that help you place the subject in the right spot in the frame so that your viewer can see it, and or use light to light the subject properly so it's lit. And we'll talk about those things. Brighten the subject right down there, a couple down below. So selective focus, blur the background. If it's a photo, if it's a portrait, blur the background. You can also do that in other pictures. If you're trying to pick a subject out, the viewer's eye will typically go to the sharpest, brightest area in the picture. So blur the background. The other is darken the surroundings. Use a vignette of the picture if you want to darken the borders of the picture, but you can also darken the background a touch and lighten the subject a touch. So lighten the subject up so that it's obvious what the subject is. Or simplify the background. If you don't have a lot of clutter there, like we talked about before, use backgrounds, a clear background or a clean background, like the sky or a wall or something like that, if you want the subject to stand out. So that's something so those are some of the things you can do to make your subject stand out. Okay. Now, if you can't find the subject to make them stand out, you've got a problem right there from the beginning, and I will show you what I mean by that. Okay. I just came back from a trip to Europe. This is in Italy. I can't remember if this was Sorrento or one of those little cute towns along the. I almost came to me. But anyways, I was in this marketplace, and like most tourists, I'm looking around. I see I just liked it. The colors of the buildings were cool, and there's a little fruit stand over there, and there are people standing there, and I just got my camera and I took a picture. And as I stood there and looked at the back of the camera, I thought, what's the subject? What am I taking a picture of here? Yeah, it's a picture of a street and some buildings, but what is the subject? Singular. Is there a subject? What's the story I'm trying to tell here? Sort of a street. It's not a very good picture. I have to say that. So I retook the picture. I stood right where I was, didn't move, and retook the picture. Okay, that's the subject. That's the subject. The subject is color. The subject is the marketplace, and the subject is the family. They're buying stuff in the marketplace. There's a father back there with a kid, and the mother's up there buying fruits for the day, and they're probably buying. This is relatively early morning, so they're out there buying some stuff to take home for the day or for breakfast or whatever. And the two guys behind are diligently working to serve them. It's a nice subject. I still have the color. The color hasn't gone away. The building behind it is still colorful, and of course the fruit and everything is very colorful. So that's a better subject, if you will. It tells a better story than the previous picture. So that's an example. Excuse me. That's an example of what I'm talking about bringing the subject out, understanding what you're taking a picture of. So now that we've done that, let's get into composition. I'm not going to cover a lot of this, but we will get into, first of all, talking about what composition is, and then they'll talk about a couple of compositional rules. First of all, before we go anywhere, Michael Freeman has a book on composition that I found on Amazon. He talks about composition is absolutely not about rules. There's no such thing as a good single way to frame a picture. That's an important thought. There's only three purposes for composition. First, you bring some sort of order to the picture and avoiding chaos. We talked about that before, the decisive moment, if you will. It's when the order emerges out of chaos. So first, composition helps you bring order out of chaos. Second, it influences the way the viewer looks at a picture. And I'm going to talk about that next. How does the viewer look at your picture? So you want to influence that. So use compositional rules and techniques to help the viewer look at the picture the way you want them to. Tell and receive and get the story that you want to be telling. Okay. And third, simply it makes the picture look more interesting, more balanced and enjoyable to look at. Doesn't look awkward. Doesn't look strange. So there's only three real reasons. Bringing order out of the chaos, influencing the viewer, and making it more enjoyable to look at. Right. We talked about influencing the viewer. How do people and how do you look at pictures? Think of yourself leafing through a lot of pictures on Flickr, or maybe even our Facebook, or even looking at the Share and Learn gallery on our website and flicking through the pictures. and you don't stop at every picture. None of us do. None of us do. We flick through the pictures, and then once in a while we go stop. We look at one, okay? And what makes us do that? Okay? The viewer will pause and notice something when they're emoted. They feel something. Remember, feeling. So if you feel nothing, nothing at all, you flip right by the picture, right? So as soon as you feel something, that's it. You stop, okay? But you want them to do more than just stop. You want them to linger. You want them to look at the picture. You want them to get into the story, okay? So they will do that. They will do that if you use some compositional techniques, if your picture looks balanced, if it tells a story. So if they can see the subject, okay, if there's a subject in the picture, the picture's balanced. It doesn't look like it's out of balance somehow. It's well balanced, and there's a story there. They can start to see the story. They will linger. They'll start to look at the picture. Okay, that's what you want them to do. All right, and as they start to look at the picture, what happens? Well, their eyes first are drawn by the perceived brightest area, and I said and sharpest in the image. You know, ideally that would be your subject, right? So your brightest and sharpest part of the image is going to be your subject, and that's where your eyes are going to go first. They'll identify the subject. All right. So that's the first thing they'll do. Then, of course, the quality of light. They're looking at the subject, and they sort of look at the overall quality of the light, which gives them that emotional feeling. Is the key to emotional response. So they're seeing the quality of the light. They see it's a nice backlit picture. They see a silhouette. They see golden light on the sunset. Whatever it is they're seeing is the next thing they start to feel. Okay, and then finally, the visual information. Once they're into the picture and you've captured them, it starts to follow compositional rules. And I have quotes around rules. As I said before, there are no such thing as rules, but it starts to follow lines, and we'll talk about lines coming up here. Starts to follow edges and corners and looking around the picture. So that composition is important in storytelling. So that's how the people will view your pictures. First, they feel something, then they start to understand it. They see balance and harmony. They look for the brightest areas. They start to use the direction of light, the quality of light in that picture. They start to enjoy that. And then they start to look at compositional rules and follow edges and lights and lines and things like this, okay? And that's really important when you get into post-processing and how you do your lighting or relighting of an image. So let's define composition, okay? This is just not a Webster's dictionary definition, but it's my definition. I think I probably got it from somewhere else. It's the placement and arrangement of visual elements, quote unquote, within a frame. We'll talk about what these visual elements are. So how I place these visual elements in a frame is literally how I compose the picture. There's a number of well-known rules that we said before. What we're looking for really is compositional balance. Balance is an important concept here. Balance is achieved when the placement of all these elements, which we talk about in relation to each other, is visually pleasing. It looks stable. It doesn't look unbalanced, okay? So simply, compositional rules are not what we're after. We're after balance. That's a feeling. Again, feeling. We get back at that. And so that's what it does. Rules can actually hurt your composition if you don't go for that balance and that feeling. So it is about what you feel, the balance you get out of a picture, and that's what you're after. All right. So let's go on to the things. What are these visual elements? What am I moving around when I compose a shot? And now I'm going to get into each one of these briefly. An example of line. There's various different kinds of lines. Space, obviously, balance is about space. If I've got some things in the image all on one side of the image or on the other side of the image, it's going to look out of balance. So it's that kind of thing that we're looking for, is that balance, the space. Shapes and forms. There's shapes and forms and everything behind me. There's trees right behind me has shapes and forms. The clouds back there have shapes and forms. And so it's all that, shapes and forms. But those things can help direct your eye, and your eye will move around those things and look around them. They will help tell the story. Colors. The colors in an image make a lot of difference. There's a lot of talk about symbolism. There's a lot of feeling that are conveyed by different colors. Textures, that tactile feeling in an image. We'll talk about that. Depth of an image. Any good image has depth. You're looking at a two-dimensional picture. You want it to look three-dimensional. And then tonal values, lights and darks. So let's get on to this. It's an interesting topic, especially lines are interesting because lines are how you lead people around. Lines are the visual path that enable the eye to move within the image And lines can be obvious things like roads and horizons and things like this, or they can be more subtle, clouds. They can even be light patterns through the trees can be lines. They can be psychological lines, and we'll get into that in a while. And those psychological lines, believe it or not, are important. Okay, different kinds of lines. What are the different kinds of line? Horizontal lines. This is an example of that. They're peaceful, restful. They give you a sense of space and peace. Excuse the cough here. Vertical lines, height, spirituality, especially the vertical lines in the center of a picture are powerful lines. Diagonal lines, this is actually a curved line and a diagonal line. Diagonal lines are movement power. Okay, you can see that here in the airplane movement, obviously moving through the picture. Diagonal lines. When you combine diagonal lines and vertical lines, you then get a sense of stability. Then, of course, there are curved lines. Curved lines are extremely interesting because their energy, speed, unlike other lines, they have a speed component to it. Okay, so this staircase starts off slow and lazy, and then as it gets toward the center, it spirals quicker and quicker. So there's a sense of speed and energy to a curved line. And then psychological lines. The line here, obviously there's a diagonal line with a little dog looking through the picture, and then his eyes, or her eyes, the little dog was called Chelsea. She's no longer with us, sad, but cute little dog, is looking out of the picture, and there's a psychological line from her eyes going out of the picture. So, and this will be important when we talk later about the rule of space, and I'll talk about that little in a while. I'll show you an example of that. But let's talk about space here, okay? What space is essentially the negative space is essentially the empty space in the picture, and then of course the other space is the space that's filled up. And how you place space and objects in your picture can create imbalance. And that's pretty obvious. I mean, this picture is semi-balanced, I think. Horizon's almost in the middle. There's not a lot of detail in the picture, but that's because that's the way it was taken. So how you put your object in your picture and how the picture is filled up with negative and positive space is important. It can create balance to a picture. It can help detract or whatever. So that's important. Visual elements. Everything's got a visual element. This just happens to be a roof of a building in Argentina. But once you got into the picture, we said before, the eyes start to go around and looking at the edges, the pictures, the corners of objects, the shapes in the picture. So this once you get into this picture, if you do it all, then you start looking, for example, at the roof dome up on top, the shapes in the roof dome, the glass. You look at the columns that lead up to that roof dome, the leading lines, if you will, that point you in that direction. And then you look at the archways down below and things like that. So your eyes start to move around and look at the edges and things. Color. We mentioned color before. Color, with all its hues and intensities, as well as its symbolism, can add drama to the picture or detract. Okay, so in some cases you don't want color in the picture because it detracts. The picture might not be about color, but if it is about color, and most of our pictures are, you want to leave it in. And color means something. In this case, the red flower bed. Red is usually could be symbolizing danger, etc. I don't know if danger in the flower beds, but there you go. This certainly highlights those flower beds, and those flower beds are what? They're lines, right? They're leading lines toward the church. So your eyes get picked up with this flower bed, and it drives you right into the church. You can see the door of the church that's facing directly at you in the center of the picture. Pretty hard to miss the subject there. In the background, you have some nice warm tones, warm being yellow, in the sky, indicating it's a sunset. So that's what color does for you. Texture, one of my favorite topics. I'll never pass by an old textured vehicle on the side of the road. I love texture. It translates into a tactile illusion. That's important. You don't feel a picture. It's a nice smooth surface, but you want to give that tactile illusion to a picture. Especially, I like to do it in I think of landscapes. If I'm looking at a landscape and I want something in the foreground, rocks an old fence, an old farm building, something in the foreground, I will add texture to that and detail to that to give it texture so that the thing has this more three-dimensional and more gives you a feeling being able to reach out and touch it. It's more real, if you will. So texture is important in your pictures. Not all the time, but if you're taking a portrait of a woman's face, for example, you don't want a lot of texture in it. So some things are important, but I like texture, and especially in old vehicles. Uh, Tone is simply the lights and darks in a picture. And I think when I think of tones, I think of dodging and burning. But tones can also be lines, if you will. There could be a light streak coming through the forest. There could be light rays coming from the sun. Whatever it is, it can help lead your lines to and around a subject. And as you get into post-processing, you do things like dodging and burning. You use things like light and dark to drive the viewer where you want them to go. And it's an important concept. So this tone is another visual element that you move around and play with. All right. And then depth. Depth is an important part of composition, and how you compose to give that feeling of depth is important because we're dealing with a two-dimensional item, which is a photograph, but you want to give a three-dimensional feel to it. So there's certain things that give you dimensional feel, depth feel to an image. Obviously, overlapping something is overlapping something else is in front of something else, right? Size and scale, things get further away, they get smaller. And that's a neat one, too, size and scale and depth. And what I think of there in particular was a trip I went to Iceland with, and we were taking pictures down at this little rock field with a lot of steam and stuff on it. And the guy who was with us, the instructor, borrowed somebody's red jacket and went down and walked into the field so he could stand out there. And why he did that was to give depth to the picture. Without him in the picture, it was hard to see what you were taking a picture of. With the man standing in the field, small, you could see how big the fumaroles, if you will, the volcanic stuff was coming out. He was standing in the middle of it all. So he gave depth and feeling to the picture. Contrast, as things that are closer up have more contrast than those things that are further away. Atmospherics, again, I tend to sometimes overdo it myself. Atmospherics is haze, right? And typically things that are further away, like the mountains in this scene, are hazier than the things that are close up. Or I do myself, and where the mistake I make is don't overuse the dehaze filter in Lightroom. Dehaze filter is good, I use it, but if you overuse it, it destroys your sense of depth in the picture. So you don't want to overuse that. Position in the picture, the higher up is further away. The mountains, which are higher than the dog, is further away. And then converging lines, things that point away from you. I think of a road going down over the horizon, things like that. As lines converge and go away, it gives a sense of depth. In this case here, there are some converging lines in the Green Mountains in the middle, all pointing toward the background where the mountains are. And in landscape photography, with this as a case, you might call them layers, right? So that you want different layers in the picture. In landscape photography, it's best to have something in the foreground. I got a dog here and some grass. You want something in the foreground, especially if it has texture in it. Make sure it's texturized. You have a feeling it's right there. It's good contrast. And then as you move toward the background, you get a middle ground, something of interest in the middle ground for your eyes to see, and then something in the far, far distance that gives depth to the image. So in landscape photography, think of layers: foreground, middle ground, background. It's all good. Okay, so make sure you've got that and to give depth to your picture. So we've talked about the elements that you're moving around when you compose something. What are some of the rules for moving those elements around? We certainly won't talk about all of these. In fact, I got a couple of pages, and then we'll move on to our critique session. So let's talk about what we're going to see as the rules of composition. I hate to say rules, guidelines. This is an example. Viewpoint is one of the ones that I think is most important in creating that peak moment, if you will. You move around until you get the right composition. You say to yourself, I got that. Everything moved into place. And one way to get the elements to move around is for you to move, okay? You move high, low, sideways, so change your viewpoint. So in this picture of the Eiffel Tower in Paris, it's one that everybody gets. Remember innovation? It's one that everybody gets. Not a bad picture. I like it. Beautiful sky that day. I kept it. It's in my portfolio of nice pictures. In fact, I probably even put it in the book that I made after this trip. I like it. It tells a story. What's the story? I saw this tower. Okay, and as you can see over which way? The other way. So the other way, anyways. I can't get my pointing here. Anyways, next to me, I saw this tower. All right, that's it. Saw the tower. Next one's the same tower, same subject. You can't miss this subject, but it's a different story because the perspective changed, the story changed. The story is, wow, that is a big, powerful diagonal lines, vertical lines in the center of the picture, power, strength. Those things are important. They tell a story. So that it's a whole different story. Same subject, different story. And then finally, as we walked away, my wife and I walked away from the Eiffel Tower back toward our hotel. I looked back down the street, and there is the same subject again, but a whole different story. This is beautiful, romantic Paris, and I love what I saw. This is the people walking down the street. It was a nice, quiet day, and leading lines. The road going off in the distance, pointing directly at the tower. The trees also, everything points, even the sky, everything's pointing directly at that tower. You can't miss what the subject is, okay? But it's a different story, okay? So that's one perspective, is one really, really important thing to think about. Rule of thirds is one that everybody knows. In fact, it's on the back of your camera if you set it up. It's on your iPhone if you set it up. It's the tic-tac-toe lines, if you will. And the rule there is pretty simple. You place your subject on one of the crosshatch marks. Okay, so if you're contextualizing your subject, as I am here, I could take a picture of that church up close, or I could contextualize it. It's in Iceland. I contextualize it by putting it on one of those crosshatches. And you're just lucky enough that the farm equipment hit the bottom hash mark. So I've got the subject contextualized with the farm equipment ahead. So this is, in other words, the story is this church is in a meadow, in a farm, in Iceland. You wouldn't know that. So it's easier to envision the subject if they're up there on the hash marks, okay? There is, this is where I get into the psychological lines, okay? And even this church has a psychological line. If I had put that church on the right hash mark instead of the left hash mark, okay, it would not have told the story very well. We talked about balance. That church would have felt crowded, looking. Church isn't looking, obviously, but the door would have been opening into the side of the picture instead of where it is opening into the pasture in front of it. I could have composed that totally different. I think it would have been out of balance. So this case, it's more in balance. So that's the idea of a psychological line. Now, there are other rules that are very similar to the rules of thirds. I think there's one called the golden triangle, and then there's the golden spiral. Well, this places the subject very, very close to the same spot. It's built. It's based on the Fibonacci sequence, which is you add the first two. You take the numbers like 1, 2, 3, and you start adding them up. 3 is 1 and 2 combined. The next number would be 2 and 3, 5. The next number would be 3 and 5, 8. So Fibonacci is that kind of sequence, and it creates a spiral. Okay. The only advantage of using this one, say over the rule of thirds, is if you're talking to friends that don't know a lot about photography and you said, I've taken this picture and I based it on the Fibonacci principle, you will definitely impress them a lot more than if you said I did use the rule of thirds. It probably is the same thing, but I don't use this one much. And to be, it's interesting too, is both Lightroom and Photoshop, when you use the crop tool, will show you this spiral. It'll also show you the rule of thirds if you want it to, and it helps you when you're composing. When we get to that workshop next month on post processing, it helps you in the composition of pictures when you're cropping. Another interesting or important idea when you're taking pictures is framing. You can frame a lot of things, more than you think you can. This one on the left is just East End Park, walking around East End Park. It's the little bench that's well lit. Remember, the best lit area, so your eyes go to the lit area. So it's obvious you know what the subject is. It's that little area there, little bend, S-curve, a nice, comfortable looking little S-curve there, so the curved lines are nice. And then there's framing around the picture, which certainly makes you know where the subject is. And then the one on the right was just a fortuitous pictures taken by some friends of ours as we were hiking in New Zealand, we were framed by the rainbow, which is pretty cool. What's also neat too is that there were airplanes flying in. There was an airport down that valley, and airplanes were flying in under that rainbow as we were there, and we watched the planes come in and wonder if the passengers in the plane could see that rainbow. Beautiful, beautiful little area. And finally, it's related to the rules of third, but I do a lot of landscape photography. And there's always a question when I'm taking pictures, where do I put the horizon? There's an old saying that I've heard, dead center is dead wrong. You never place the horizon in the center of your picture. You place it either in the upper third line of the rule of thirds or on the bottom third line. You use the bottom line if the sky is more interesting and that's what you're trying to get, for example, a sunset, or if the foreground is interesting, you want to capture that, you put it on the upper one. In this case, I use the upper line because I like the foreground with the lake. But is that really always the case? No, it isn't. Not dead wrong. There are times when you can go ahead and put things right in the middle. So there's this particular case here. This is more in the center of the picture. Another dead branch, my favorite subject, in the desert, looking off toward the sunset. In this case, the branch is more like a arrow pointing at the sunset, drawing your eye over in that direction. Beautiful, beautiful sky, and beautiful foreground with my foreground element in landscape. Remember, there's a foreground element to give it depth. The tree. So I couldn't decide. I like this thing composed the way it is with the horizon almost dead center. I think it looks good. Again, it's a lot of people can think different things. Again, rule of thirds. The tree is placed roughly in the rule of thirds, bottom right hash mark. So let's talk about, that's enough composition because I'm going to try to get next into talking about your images, your pictures, and critiquing them using some of our thoughts and trying to be artistic if we can. How do you get to the next level and become a more intentional artist? We all want to do that, right? First, be aware of your likes and dislikes. Don't be ashamed of them. Don't be, try to hide them. Talk about them a little bit. I like this. It makes me feel sad. It's happy. It's awesome. Whatever it is you feel like. Be aware of those feelings, your likes and dislikes, and how you feel about something. Create a vocabulary. Okay. How does something make you feel? Be purposeful in visualizing throughout the creation process. I mean throughout, all the way through post-processing. Start off with something in your head, a feeling, and something in your head a lot of times is a feeling or a symbol of something, and then work toward that feeling. We work toward it. Stop looking for pixel perfection. None of us are perfect, and the beauty of art is that it isn't perfect. It's always a journey. We're never there. So keep on striving. Keep on trying to make your art better. Don't obsess about pixels. Obsess about the art you're doing. Be aware of compositional rules. Again, obsession. Don't obsess about rules. Obsess about balance. Does the picture feel right to you? Space. How are the objects? The weight of the picture. How does it look? Can you tell what the subject is? That kind of things. Don't obsess about the rules. Obsess about does it feel okay when you look at it. Don't shy away from post-processing, and this is me preaching again. I'll say it over and over again. Post-processing is part of the process. It's not all right out of your camera, generally speaking. It usually improves or gets better if you know to do something afterwards with it to bring out the story a little bit. So re-envision, I call it re-envisioning, recompose as you get home. Okay, take out the imperfections. And then make it just a little bit better. Okay, so that is how you hopefully get better. And as you go off, I hope you try some of these techniques. Just a little advertising for next month. Art of Photography, the rest of the story. I just told you part of the story. The rest of the story, we talked about the left-hand side here where the camera is, envisioning. I did mention post-processing, I shouldn't say that, but envisioning, framing, composition, exposure, white balance, focus. That's what you do on the camera, right? But it's a lot more to that. So the rest of the story is the analogous operations in post-processing are cropping, brightening, contrast, color correction, sharpening, denoise. Those are the things you would be doing in post-processing to complete your story, okay? You might say photo editing is the entire process. You've heard the term photo editing and post-processing probably used interchangeably, but really photo editing starts when you pick the camera up and start composing that picture. You're editing to try to create what your vision was before you did that. So right away you're editing the picture. When you transfer those pictures into your computer, now you're post-processing the pictures and you're doing more with it. And so we'll talk about critiquing images and getting into the next part of the show. Obviously, this is a pre-recorded, so it's a little bit. We won't be critiquing pictures. I have some of my own here, but what I'd like to do, a little outline, and this is not anybody's rules here. It's just the ones I thought of. Observe without judgment. Observe the picture. What do you see? No judgments here. Just what do I see? What's the subject? Can you tell what the subject of the picture is? Okay, and if the person in the room who took this picture needs to help you, that's fine. Maybe they'll tell you what they thought the subject was. It may or may not differ. It may differ. Okay, describe what you see. What are the elements in the picture that you see? All right. Analyze how those elements work together. How does your eye go? Does the picture feel balanced to you? Okay. Does anything in the picture strike you as symbolic? If there's any symbolism in the picture, go ahead and say it. That don't feel bad. This is art, right? This is about the soft stuff. So is there some symbolism in the picture? Describe it. And then without liking or disliking, and what do you feel about the picture? What do you feel? How does that make you feel? Okay. I'll just give you an example of a picture here just to sort of get us started. This is one of my own, taken in New Zealand. Okay. And I use this picture on purpose because I would say, what do I see? Okay. What do I see is a bunch of trees, right? Light hitting the trees in front, sort of nice little light on the trees. The trees are dark. And then looking through the trees, I see clouds coming over some mountains and nice bright sunlight hitting the mountains in the background. Okay. Interesting pictures. Okay. And then going back to what's the subject in this picture, right? So I'm just observing what's the subject in this picture. Well, the subject in this picture, what would it be? I guess it would be that mountain in the background with the light on it and the clouds coming over. Okay, so the subject is that. How do they all work together? What are the elements in the picture? Okay, first of all, let's look what's the subject. What are the elements and how do they work together? Let's look at that. Okay, the elements in the pictures. Well, there's a sort of a V-shaped light area there, so that could be that's where the light is. There's lines in the picture, not many. There's not many lines. There's certainly the tonality in the picture. There's some very dark edges to the picture, dark in front, dark around the edge. That's called vignetting. There's some lighter areas of the trees that elements in the picture. The shapes. Okay, there's interesting shapes of the trees there, light in the background. So there's tones. There's very much tonality in the picture, and textures. There's the trees in the foreground. There's textures in the picture. So there's some elements there. How do they work together? Okay, since it's my own picture, I'll be biased. I think they work together well. The picture's balanced. Let's go back to this thing here. Analyze how elements work. I think it's balanced. That's what I said. Does anything strike you as symbolic in the picture? So let's look at this. Does anything strike me as symbolic in the picture? Okay, to me, again, it's my own picture. The clouds coming over the top of the mountain show a change in weather. It could be rain approaching, and this was New Zealand, so when we were there that particular month, it rained a lot. So yeah, it probably was rain approaching. We were probably standing in the rain, or had been standing in the rain. We were out hiking. So yes, there's that kind of feel to the picture, maybe impending change in weather, but the light on the side of the mountain, the light was poking through hope in the distance. That to me is what that sort of symbolizes. It's beauty. And then let's go back to that thing, and so we symbolize them, and then do I like or dislike the picture? That's an unfair image for myself, because yeah, sure, I like the picture, it's mine. So, but you don't have to, and that's the point. So I hope this was interesting too, and the real class will get into some more pictures and use your pictures.